My name is Daniel, and I'm a 42-year-old software developer living in Austin, Texas. My wife, Sophie, is 38, a yoga instructor with a radiant smile that once felt like the sun to me. We've been married for 12 years with 2 kids, Ella, 10, and Max, 7. We live in a modest but comfortable house in South Austin, the kind with a white picket fence and a porch swing. Life was good, or at least I thought it was. It all began on a random Thursday in mid-September, just as the summer heat was giving way to the early whispers of fall. I came home earlier than usual that day, around 3 p.m. I'd wrapped up work from home, as my boss had approved a half-day for me to attend Ella's soccer game later that evening. Sophie was supposed to be teaching a yoga class at her studio downtown. When I walked in, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Normally, Sophie would have the washer running or the soft hum of her yoga playlist filling the space. I called out, "Sophie, you home?" No answer. I headed to the kitchen, grabbing a water bottle from the fridge. As I twisted off the cap, I noticed something out of place on the counter, a red leather wallet that didn't belong to either of us. It was open, and inside was an ID with the name Connor Blake. He was 27 years old, with a chiseled jawline and the kind of smirk you'd see on a guy who knew he looked good. The ID listed him as living a few miles away, near Zilker Park. I frowned, picking up the wallet. Why was it here? Maybe Sophie found it at the studio and was planning to return it. That seemed plausible, though something about it didn't sit right with me. I walked up the stairs to our bedroom, planning to grab my gym bag. As I reached the top, I heard it, a low, muffled laugh coming from behind the closed door of our bedroom. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't Sophie's laugh. It was deeper, male. I stood there for a moment, paralyzed. The air seemed to thicken around me, and my chest tightened as a whirlwind of thoughts surged through my mind. Was Sophie cheating on me? Was there someone in our house, in our bed? I tried to push the idea out of my head, but the sound of voices confirmed my worst fears. I crept closer to the door, my footsteps careful and silent on the carpet. The voices became clearer. "God, I can't believe we got away with this," the man said, his voice tinged with amusement. "Sure," Sophie replied, her tone light but cautious. Daniel could come home any minute. Her words sent a cold wave of anger and betrayal washing over me. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. Every fiber of my being told me to fling the door open, but something held me back. Instead, I knelt down and peered through the crack beneath the door. Sophie was sitting on the edge of the bed, her long brown hair cascading down her back. She was wearing a robe I'd bought her for our anniversary last year, but it was loose, barely clinging to her shoulders. Connor, shirtless and sculpted like a Greek statue, was sprawled across the bed, smirking at her. The sheets were tangled, and the unmistakable scent of sweat and cologne wafted out into the hallway. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. My pulse was pounding in my ears, a deafening drumbeat that drowned out everything else. For a fleeting moment, I thought about storming in, confronting them, screaming, fighting. But instead, I backed away, my breath shallow and uneven. I needed proof. If I barged in now, Sophie would twist it, deny it, make excuses. I turned, heading back down the stairs as quietly as I'd come up. My mind raced, planning my next move. I left the house quickly, my heart still pounding in my chest. I drove aimlessly for a while, unable to think clearly. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and I fought the urge to turn back and confront them. Instead, I parked in an empty lot near Lady Bird Lake, staring blankly at the water. I needed to calm down and figure out what to do next. After a few minutes, I took out my phone and started searching for a voice recorder app. If I was going to confront Sophie, I needed solid evidence, something undeniable. I also decided to buy a small hidden camera online, something I could place discreetly in the bedroom. My anger was sharp and bitter, but I knew that if I acted without a plan, I'd lose control. I stayed out until about 6 p.m., then drove back home, rehearsing my lines in my head like an actor before a performance. When I pulled into the driveway, Sophie's car was parked in its usual spot. I entered the house, and the first thing that struck me was the faint but lingering scent of cologne. Connor was gone, but his presence still clung to the air like a ghost. Sophie was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables. She greeted me with a smile, as though nothing had happened. "Hey, honey," she said cheerfully. "You're back early." How was your day? I studied her for a moment. She looked perfectly composed, her hair tied back into a neat ponytail. Her yoga outfit had been replaced by a casual blouse and jeans. She was playing the part of the loving wife flawlessly. It was fine, I said, keeping my tone neutral. How was yours? She shrugged, her knife slicing through a carrot with precision. Busy. Taught 2 classes today. The evening one was packed. I'm exhausted. The ease with which she lied sent a fresh wave of anger through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I walked over to the counter, pretending to grab an apple, and spotted the wallet I'd seen earlier. It was gone. She must have moved it. Did you find anything interesting today? I asked casually, watching her reaction closely. She paused for a fraction of a second, just enough to be noticeable, before continuing to chop. Interesting? No, not really. Why do you ask? I shrugged, taking a bite of the apple. I thought I saw something on the counter earlier, but maybe I was imagining it. She didn't respond, but her posture stiffened slightly. I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was calculating, trying to figure out if I suspected anything. I decided not to press further. Not yet. That night, after Sophie went to bed, I stayed up late in my office, pretending to work. In reality, I was reviewing the camera options I'd found earlier. I ordered one with overnight delivery, a small device disguised as a phone charger. It was perfect. Once it arrived, I'd have all the evidence I needed. The next day, Sophie acted completely normal, as if nothing had happened. She kissed me goodbye before leaving for the studio and even texted me a picture of her lunch, something she often did to show off her healthy meals. It was maddening how easily she slipped into her routine, as though her betrayal didn't exist. When the package arrived that evening, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. I installed the camera in our bedroom while Sophie was in the shower, making sure it was angled perfectly to capture the entire room. I tested it, ensuring it was recording and discreet. Then I waited. It didn't take long. 2 days later, I came home during lunch, claiming I had a headache and needed to rest. Sophie had left her schedule on the counter that morning, and I noticed she didn't have a class scheduled during that time. My gut told me she'd use the opportunity. I parked a few blocks away and approached the house on foot, careful not to make a sound. I let myself in with my key, then went straight to my office, closing the door quietly behind me. From my phone, I accessed the camera feed. There they were, Sophie and Connor, tangled together on the bed, laughing, touching, completely unaware they were being recorded. My chest tightened as I watched, but I couldn't look away. This wasn't just a fling. There was an intimacy between them that cut deeper than any physical betrayal. When they finally finished and Connor left, I stayed in my office, my hands trembling as I replayed the footage. It was undeniable. This was my proof. I sat in my office for what felt like hours, staring at the footage on my phone. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to storm out, confront Sophie, and end this charade right there. But I held back. This wasn't just about rage anymore. It was about taking control of the situation on my terms. When I finally left the office, it was nearly dinner time. Sophie was in the kitchen again, this time preparing chicken Alfredo, one of my favorites. The smell wafted through the house, but instead of comforting me, it felt suffocating. She was humming softly to herself, completely at ease. "Hey," she said as I walked in. "You feeling better? You look like you had a long day." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just tired. The headache's mostly gone." "Good," she replied, glancing at me over her shoulder. "Dinner will be ready in about 20 minutes. I leaned against the counter, watching her. She was so composed, so ordinary, as though nothing in her world was out of place. The ease with which she carried on her double life made my stomach churn. I clenched my fists behind the counter, forcing myself to stay calm. That night, I lay in bed next to her, staring at the ceiling while she slept. Her breathing was steady and peaceful, as if she didn't have a care in the world. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head. Her laughter with Connor, the way she touched him, the lies she fed me day after day. By morning, I had a plan. The next day, I told Sophie I'd be working late. It wasn't unusual. My job often required late hours, so she didn't question it. Instead of going to the office, I went to a small cafe downtown and called my lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Rachel Turner. She'd helped me draft a prenup before our marriage, though at the time I never thought I'd need it. Now, I was grateful for her foresight. Rachel listened carefully as I laid everything out, the affair, the proof, my plan. When I finished, there was a brief silence on the other end of the line. "You've got a solid case," she said finally. "The prenup is airtight. If she's been unfaithful, you'll walk away with everything." "I don't just want to walk away," I replied, my voice hard. "I want her to feel this." Rachel paused. "Revenge is a slippery slope, Daniel. Be careful you don't let it consume you." "I'll handle it," I said, more to convince myself than her. "Just tell me what I need to do." Rachel gave me a list of steps. Gather all the financial documents, secure my assets, and make sure the evidence was saved in multiple places. I spent the rest of the afternoon preparing, my anger fueling me like a fire that wouldn't burn out. When I finally returned home that night, Sophie greeted me at the door with a kiss, as though everything was normal. But it wasn't. Not anymore. Over the next few days, I played the part of the oblivious husband, keeping up appearances while putting my plan into motion. I transferred money into a separate account, changed the passwords on my personal accounts, and consulted with Rachel to finalize the details of our strategy. Every time Sophie smiled at me or kissed me goodbye, it only hardened my resolve. Then came the day I was ready to confront her. It was a Saturday morning when I decided it was time. Sophie was in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. The kids were at my parents' house for the weekend. I'd arranged it deliberately, not wanting them to witness what was about to happen. My heart was pounding, but I felt a strange calm wash over me. "This was it." "Sophie," I called from the living room. "Can you come here for a minute?" "Sure," she replied, setting her mug down and walking toward me with a curious expression. "What's up?" I sat on the couch, gesturing for her to take the seat opposite me. She frowned slightly, but complied, her posture relaxed. She had no idea what was coming. "I need to talk to you about something," I began, keeping my tone even. "And I need you to be completely honest with me." Her eyes flickered with a hint of unease, but she quickly masked it with a smile. "Of course. What's going on?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I'd already queued up the footage from the hidden camera, ready to play. Without a word, I hit play and turned the screen toward her. The color drained from her face as the video began. There she was with Connor on our bed. The laughter, the touches, the betrayal. It was all there, undeniable and raw. Sophie's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at me, her eyes wide with panic. "Daniel," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can explain." "Explain?" I cut her off, my voice sharp. "Explain what, Sophie? That you've been screwing some kid in our bed while I'm out working to support this family? Go ahead. I'd love to hear your explanation." She flinched at the venom in my tone. "It's not what it looks like," she said weakly, tears welling in her eyes. I made a mistake, but it didn't mean anything. I swear." I let out a bitter laugh. "Didn't mean anything? Sophie, you've been lying to me for God knows how long. How many times, huh? Once? Twice? Or is this a regular thing?" She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. "I'm so sorry, Daniel. I never wanted to hurt you. Please, you have to believe me." I stood up, towering over her. "Believe you? After this? You're unbelievable." For a moment, the room was filled only with the sound of her crying. I paced back and forth, trying to rein in my anger. Then I turned to her, my voice cold. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. We have a prenup. Remember? You'll get nothing. No house, no savings, nothing. You can take your yoga mats and whatever fits in your car." Her head snapped up, her tear-streaked face filled with shock. "You're divorcing me? What did you think, Sophie?" I said, my voice rising. "That I'd just forgive you? That we go back to normal? You destroyed this marriage the moment you brought him into our home." She reached out to grab my arm, desperation in her eyes. "Please, Daniel, don't do this. I'll end it with Connor. I'll do anything to fix this." I shook her off, my voice like ice. "It's too late, Sophie. You made your choice, and now you'll live with the consequences." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't care. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her to sit in the ruins of what she'd done. Upstairs, I packed a bag. I couldn't stay in the house any longer. Not with her there. Not with the memories of what she'd done. Before leaving, I paused in the doorway of the living room. Sophie looked up at me, her face red and blotchy from crying. "I'll have Rachel contact you about the paperwork," I said flatly. You should start looking for somewhere else to live. And with that, I walked out the door, closing it behind me with a finality that felt both crushing and liberating. I drove aimlessly for a while, the weight of everything pressing down on me like a lead blanket. The house, the marriage, the life I thought I had. It all felt like it belonged to someone else now. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, breaking my thoughts. It was a message from Sophie. Sophie, please, can we talk? I need to explain. Don't just walk away like this. I ignored it. What could she possibly explain that I didn't already know? I turned the phone off and kept driving. Eventually, I found myself at a small motel on the outskirts of the city. It was the kind of place you go to disappear, and that's exactly what I needed. The room was sparse, a queen-sized bed with a faded quilt, a tiny desk, and a TV bolted to the wall. I tossed my bag on the bed and sat down, my head in my hands. I didn't cry. I was too angry for that. Instead, I opened my laptop and started writing an email to Rachel, detailing everything that had happened during the confrontation and asking for next steps. The act of writing it all down felt surreal, as though I was describing someone else's life. The next morning, I woke up to a flurry of messages and missed calls. Sophie had been relentless, alternating between desperate pleas and promises to fix everything. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I called Rachel. I confronted her. I said, skipping the pleasantries. And Rachel asked, her tone professional. She admitted it. Cried, begged, said it didn't mean anything. But I don't believe her. She'll probably try to reconcile, Rachel said. Cheaters usually do when they realize what they stand to lose. Well, I'm not interested, I replied firmly. What's the next step? Rachel outlined the process. Filing for divorce, serving the papers, and ensuring that Sophie didn't have access to our joint accounts or assets. I'd already taken care of most of it, but hearing her confirm the plan gave me a sense of control in the chaos. After hanging up, I drove back to the house to grab more of my belongings. Sophie's car was in the driveway, but I didn't hesitate. I walked in without knocking, surprising her in the kitchen. She was sitting at the table, clutching a mug of coffee. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hair a mess. Daniel, she said, standing up as I entered. You came back. Not for you, I said bluntly. I'm here to get my things. She flinched at the coldness in my voice, but didn't argue. I headed upstairs, grabbing clothes, toiletries, and a few personal items. As I was packing, I heard her footsteps behind me. Please, can we just talk? She said, her voice trembling. I know I screwed up, but we've been together for 12 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you? I turned to face her, my jaw tight. It did, Sophie, but you threw that away. You didn't just cheat on me. You disrespected me, our home, and everything we built together. How am I supposed to come back from that? Tears streamed down her face. I was stupid, Daniel. I don't even know why I did it. It didn't mean anything. Connor doesn't mean anything. Stop lying to yourself. I snapped. If it didn't mean anything, you wouldn't have risked everything for him. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her shoulders shaking as she cried. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of her betrayal. Sign the divorce papers when they come, I said, slinging my bag over my shoulder. It'll be easier for both of us if you don't fight this. She looked up at me, desperation in her eyes. Daniel, please, don't do this. I love you. I shook my head. You don't love me, Sophie. You love the comfort, the stability. But love? That died the moment you brought him into our bed. Without another word, I walked out, leaving her sobbing in the empty house. As I drove away, I felt a strange sense of relief. The pain was still there, sharp and raw, but there was also a newfound clarity. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new. In the weeks that followed, Sophie and I communicated only through lawyers. The divorce process moved quickly, thanks to the airtight prenup. She didn't contest it, probably because she knew there was no point. I stayed in the motel for a while, not ready to move back into the house. Rachel suggested selling it as part of the settlement, which I agreed to. The house had become a graveyard of memories I no longer wanted. Despite cutting Sophie off personally, her presence lingered in my life through whispers from mutual friends and acquaintances. Austin isn't a small town, but our social circles overlapped just enough to keep me in the loop. Word spread quickly about the divorce, and speculation ran wild. I didn't bother clarifying or correcting the rumors. Let people think what they wanted. It wasn't their business. One day, about a month after I'd left the house, I received an unexpected email. The subject line read, "For closure." It was from Sophie. I stared at it for a while, debating whether to open it. Against my better judgment, I clicked. The email was long, rambling, and filled with apologies. She admitted to the affair, detailing how it started, a chance encounter with Connor at her yoga studio. She claimed she'd been feeling neglected, like we'd fallen into a routine that left her yearning for excitement. It wasn't an excuse, she wrote, but an explanation. She begged for my forgiveness, not to reconcile, but to heal herself. I closed the email without responding. Her words felt hollow, like an attempt to absolve herself rather than take true accountability. If she wanted closure, she'd have to find it on her own. A week later, I received a call from Rachel. "The divorce is finalized," she said. "Sophie signed the papers this morning." The relief I felt was immediate, though it was tinged with sadness. 12 years of marriage reduced to a signature on a piece of paper. It felt surreal. Rachel also informed me that Sophie had moved out of the house. It was officially mine to sell or keep. The next day, I went back to the house for the first time since leaving. It felt eerie, like stepping into a time capsule of my old life. Sophie's belongings were gone, but traces of her remained. The faint smell of her perfume, a few forgotten trinkets in the drawers. I walked through the room slowly, memories flooding back with each step. In the bedroom, I stood by the bed where it had all unraveled. I thought I'd feel anger or sadness, but instead I felt nothing. The betrayal had hollowed out any emotion tied to this place. I picked up the camera I'd hidden, removing it from its spot in the corner. It had served its purpose, and now it was just another piece of the past I was leaving behind. Selling the house was surprisingly easy. A young couple bought it within weeks, thrilled to start their new life in a place that no longer held any meaning for me. With the money from the sale, I rented a small loft downtown, a fresh start in every sense of the word. As the weeks turned into months, I started to rebuild. Therapy helped, so did reconnecting with old friends and picking up hobbies I'd abandoned over the years. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. Sophie faded further into the background with each passing day. One evening, as I sat on my balcony overlooking the city, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from an unknown number. "Unknown. I'm sorry for everything. I hope you're doing okay." I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. I didn't need Sophie's apologies or her guilt. I didn't need closure. I had my own now. Months passed, and the pieces of my life began to fall into place. The divorce was behind me. The house was sold, and I'd settled into my loft downtown. It wasn't the life I had envisioned, but it was a clean slate. My work as a software developer kept me busy during the week, and on weekends, I started going out more, exploring Austin in ways I hadn't in years. One evening, I found myself at a rooftop bar on Rainy Street. The air was warm, and the city lights shimmered like a blanket of fireflies against the dark sky. I was nursing a whiskey, savoring the calm buzz it brought, when someone slid onto the bar stool next to me. "Daniel," a familiar voice said. I turned to see her, Sophie. She looked different, older somehow, though it had only been a few months since I'd last seen her. Her hair was tied back, and she wore a simple blouse and jeans, a far cry from the polished image she usually projected. For a moment, I was too stunned to speak. "What are you doing here?" I finally asked, my tone guarded. I didn't expect to see you," she said, her voice uncertain. "I've been coming here sometimes. It's quiet." I nodded, taking a sip of my drink. "Well, here we are." She hesitated, then asked, "Do you have a minute?" "To talk." I could have walked away. Part of me wanted to, but another part, maybe curiosity, maybe something else, made me gesture to the bartender for another drink. "Fine," I said. "Talk." She took a deep breath. "I've been working on myself," she began. "Therapy, journaling, trying to figure out why I did what I did. I owe you an apology, Daniel. A real one." I said nothing, letting her continue. "I know I hurt you in ways I can't take back," she said, her eyes glistening with tears. "I was selfish. I took you for granted. And I destroyed something good. I just wanted to tell you that I'm sorry." Her words hung in the air between us, fragile and heavy. I studied her face, searching for something, remorse, sincerity. I wasn't sure what. Do you think that changes anything? I asked quietly. No, she admitted, her voice breaking. I don't expect it to. But I needed to say it. For me. And for you. I looked away, the whiskey in my glass catching the light. Her apology felt genuine, but it didn't erase the pain or undo the damage. Still, there was a small part of me that appreciated her honesty. Thank you, I said finally, for saying that. But I've moved on, Sophie. I've had to. I hope you can too. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I understand. I just wanted you to know. We sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the bar filling the void. Then she stood, looking at me one last time. Take care of yourself, Daniel, she said softly. You too, I replied, my voice steady. And with that, she walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of closure and finality. The chapter with Sophie was officially over. For the first time in months, I felt free. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. New cheating wife stories tomorrow.